Colorado Territory, 1868. The sky hung heavy with storm clouds as Owen Sullivan guided his horse down the rutted trail toward Willow Creek. At 25, he'd already lived several lifetimes of pain. The war had left its mark, not in visible scars, but in the hollow emptiness behind his eyes. His lean frame and handsome features belied the brokenness within. Under the shadow of his cream-colored Stetson, his green eyes remained vigilant, scanning the horizon for threats that seemed to lurk everywhere in his mind. The life of a cowhand suited Owen. Cattle didn't ask questions. They didn't remind him of brothers lost at Gettysburg or the weight of surviving when better men had fallen. Ranching was solitary work that required little conversation, and that's exactly how Owen preferred it. His belief had solidified over years of loss and betrayal. Caring for others only gave the world more weapons to use against you. "You keep to yourself, you stay alive," he muttered to his horse, a chestnut gelding named Rusty who'd been his only companion for the past 3 years. The animal's ears flicked back at the sound of his voice, rare as it was. Owen adjusted his worn leather vest over his cotton shirt, the fabric faded from too many washings in cold streams. His gun belt sat low on his hips, the Colt revolver a constant reminder that danger was never far in these parts. The mountains loomed in the distance, beautiful but unforgiving, much like life itself. Willow Creek emerged in the valley below, a dusty collection of buildings that barely qualified as a town. Owen only intended to stock up on supplies and perhaps spend one night in a real bed before heading back to the Box T Ranch where he worked. The ranch owner, Thomas Tucker, had sent him to fetch mail and provisions, a task Owen had volunteered for to avoid the rowdy celebration marking the end of spring roundup. As he rode down the main street, mud from yesterday's rain splashed beneath Rusty's hooves. The usual sounds of a frontier town surrounded him, the blacksmith's hammer, distant piano from the saloon, a woman calling to her children. Owen kept his head down, acknowledging folks with nothing more than a slight tip of his hat. The mercantile's bell jingled as he pushed through the door. The shop smelled of coffee, leather, and sweet tobacco, a comforting familiarity in a world where nothing stayed the same for long. "Mr. Sullivan. Haven't seen you in these parts for months." Albert Johnson, the shopkeeper, was a round man with a perpetual smile that Owen never quite trusted. "Mr. Johnson," Owen nodded curtly, handing over the list Tucker had written. "Need these loaded in my wagon by morning." "Certainly, certainly," Johnson adjusted his spectacles. "Must be busy out at Box T with all the new stock." Owen grunted an affirmation, his attention already drifting toward the door. He'd complete his business and be gone by first light. Conversation was an unnecessary complication. That's when the bell jangled again, and Owen's carefully constructed world began to crack at its foundation. She entered with the April sunshine streaming behind her, casting her silhouette in golden light before the door swung closed. Delilah Lambert was 22 years old, with chestnut hair that cascaded in waves down her back, partially contained by a practical ribbon. Her blue calico dress was simple but well-fitted, displaying a quiet dignity rather than frontier flashiness. The journey was evident in her face, slightly flushed from the wind, a smudge of dust across one cheek, but it did nothing to diminish her natural beauty. "Miss Lambert," Johnson exclaimed, immediately abandoning Owen to greet the newcomer. "I wasn't expecting you until next week." "The stage made better time than expected," she replied, her voice carrying a slight Eastern accent that marked her as not from these parts. "I hope my room at Mrs. Patterson's is still available." "I'm certain it is." Johnson beamed. "Your classroom is all prepared at the schoolhouse, just as the town council promised." A schoolteacher, Owen almost snorted. The territory was no place for Eastern refinement or book learning. He'd give her 6 months before she fled back to civilization. As if sensing his judgment, Delilah turned toward him, her hazel eyes meeting his with unexpected directness. "Good afternoon," she said with a polite nod. Owen touched the brim of his hat without speaking, hoping to end the interaction there, but Johnson, ever the socialite, wouldn't allow it. "Miss Lambert, this here is Owen Sullivan, works for the Box T Ranch." "Owen, Miss Delilah Lambert is our new schoolteacher, come all the way from Boston." "Massachusetts," she corrected gently, "though I was raised in Pennsylvania." Owen nodded again, uncomfortable under her steady gaze. There was something about her eyes, they seemed to see more than most, as if she could read the darkness he carried. "Mr. Sullivan," she continued, extending a gloved hand, "a pleasure to make your acquaintance." The gesture caught him off guard. Women in these parts rarely offered handshakes to men they didn't know. Reluctantly, he took her hand, surprised by the firmness of her grip. Ma'am, it was the only word he could manage. I understand ranching is the lifeblood of this community, she said. Perhaps you might visit the schoolhouse sometime. The children would benefit from learning about the practical aspects of territory life. The suggestion was so unexpected that Owen found himself momentarily speechless. The idea of him surrounded by children attempting to teach anything was absurd. I doubt that would be useful to anyone, Miss Lambert. His voice came out rougher than intended. If she was offended by his curtness, she didn't show it. Instead, her lips curved slightly. I've found, Mr. Sullivan, that people often underestimate their value to others. Before he could formulate a response, a crash from outside drew everyone's attention. Shouts followed, then the unmistakable sound of breaking glass. Not again, Johnson muttered, hurrying to the window. Owen instinctively moved toward the door, positioning himself between the commotion and Miss Lambert without conscious thought. Through the window, he could see a group of cowboys, not box T men, making trouble outside the saloon across the street. Ramsay's crew, Johnson explained, been causing trouble since they rode in yesterday. Owen recognized the name, a small outfit north of town with a reputation for hiring troublemakers. I'll take my supplies now, he said tersely. Better to load up before that spills over. But your order won't be ready until... I'll wait at the livery, Owen cut him off, heading for the door. He'd spent enough time in town already, and the schoolteacher's presence made him uneasy in ways he couldn't name. Mr. Sullivan, Delilah called as he reached for the handle, would you mind escorting me to Mrs. Patterson's boarding house? It seems the afternoon has become more eventful than anticipated. The request stopped him cold. Everything in him wanted to refuse, to maintain the careful distance he kept from everyone. But across the street, the cowboys were getting rowdier, and the thought of her walking alone past their drunken revelry stirred something protective he'd thought long dead. It's just up the street, she added, as if sensing his reluctance. Owen glanced at Johnson, hoping the shopkeeper would offer instead, but the man was already busying himself with inventory, deliberately avoiding Owen's gaze. Fine, Owen finally said. But I'm not staying for tea. A small smile touched her lips. I wouldn't dream of imposing. As they stepped onto the boardwalk, the shouting across the street grew louder. Owen instinctively positioned himself between Delilah and the saloon, his hand resting near his holster. They walked in silence, Owen hyper-aware of both the rowdy cowboys and the woman beside him, who seemed remarkably calm despite the disturbance. Have you worked at the box tea long, mister Sullivan? She asked, as if they were merely taking a pleasant stroll. 3 years, he answered, keeping his eyes on the men across the street, and before that. Does it matter? She considered this, her pace unhurried despite the situation. I suppose not, though I've found that knowing where people come from helps in understanding who they are. Some things are better left unknown, Miss Lambert. A cowboy stumbled out of the saloon, catching sight of them. His face split in a leering grin as he nudged his companion and pointed in their direction. Owen tensed, ready for trouble. Well, look at that fine. Owen's hand moved to his gun, a warning clear in his stance. The cowboy faltered, then thought better of whatever he'd planned to say, retreating back into the saloon with a muttered curse. Thank you, Delilah said quietly as they continued walking. For what? For preventing an unpleasant encounter without resorting to violence. Owen grunted. Sometimes the threat is enough. And sometimes it isn't, she observed. You've seen that too, I imagine. The comment struck too close to memories he kept buried. Before he could respond, they arrived at a neat 2-story house with white trim and a small garden attempting to thrive in the harsh climate. This is it, she said, pausing at the gate. Thank you for the escort, Mr. Sullivan. He nodded, eager to be on his way, but found himself strangely reluctant to leave her. Lock your doors tonight. Those cowboys won't likely settle down until they've drunk themselves unconscious. I appreciate the warning. She tilted her head, studying him with those perceptive eyes. Will you be in town long? Just until morning. Then perhaps our paths will cross again before you leave. Unlikely, he said, though without his usual gruffness. Delilah smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes and momentarily transformed her face into something that made Owen's chest tighten unexpectedly. In my experience, Mr. Sullivan, the unlikely happens far more often than we anticipate. She opened the gate. Good day to you. Owen watched her walk up the path, greeted at the door by an older woman who must have been Mrs. Patterson, only when the door closed behind her did he turn away, unsettled by the encounter in ways he couldn't define. That night, as he lay on a thin mattress in the livery's back room, sleep eluded him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Delilah Lambert's face, not in fear or judgment, but with that look of quiet perception, as if she could see straight through the walls he'd built around himself. Damn foolishness, he muttered, turning over restlessly. The war had taught him that survival meant keeping to himself. The years after had only reinforced that belief. One chance meeting with an Eastern schoolteacher wouldn't change anything. But as he finally drifted toward sleep, a treacherous thought slipped through his defenses. What if it could? Morning brought hard reality back into focus. Owen was up before dawn, loading supplies into his wagon while the town still slept. The events at the saloon had apparently continued late into the night. Evidence of the brawl littered the street in broken glass and splinters from a chair that had found its way through a window. As he secured the last crate, a movement caught his eye. Delilah Lambert stood on the boardwalk outside the Mercantile, conversing with Sheriff Mills. Even at this early hour, she was neatly dressed in a dark blue skirt and white shirtwaist, her hair braided and coiled at the nape of her neck. The sheriff appeared to be showing her something in his hand, a small badge of some sort. Curiosity got the better of Owen. Leading his wagon down the street, he found himself slowing as he approached them. "Morning, Sullivan," the sheriff called, heading back to Box T. "Yes, sir," Owen tipped his hat. "Miss Lambert."
"Mr.
Sullivan, her smile seemed to brighten the gray morning. "You're leaving early."
Long ride ahead."
Sheriff Mills held up the item in his hand, a small, tarnished star. "Was just showing Miss Lambert here the first sheriff's badge of Willow Creek. My grandfather wore it back in '49. "How fascinating," Delilah said with what appeared to be genuine interest. "The history of this region is so rich, yet so few records exist." "That's because most folks were too busy staying alive to write things down," Owen found himself saying. "Precisely why oral history is so important," she replied, "which is why I hope you'll reconsider my invitation to speak to the schoolchildren someday." Before Owen could refuse again, a commotion erupted from down the street. 3 men on horseback thundered into town, riding recklessly fast. One fired a pistol into the air, the report echoing off the buildings. "Damn it," Mills cursed, reaching for his gun.
"Ramsay's men again."
Owen instinctively moved toward Delilah, his hand dropping to his holster. "Get inside, Miss Lambert." But she didn't move, her eyes fixed on the approaching riders with more curiosity than fear.
"Surely the sheriff can handle."
"Now," Owen said firmly, taking her arm and guiding her toward the Mercantile door. To his surprise, she allowed it, though her expression suggested the compliance was temporary. Sheriff Mills stepped into the street, his hand raised. "That's enough, this is a peaceable town." The lead rider, a man with a wild beard and wilder eyes, laughed and fired another shot, this one deliberately close to the sheriff's feet. Mills jumped back, drawing his weapon. "Last warning, Carter," he shouted. Owen pushed Delilah through the Mercantile door, then turned back toward the confrontation. The situation was deteriorating quickly, and Mills was outnumbered. "Stay inside," he ordered over his shoulder, then stepped off the boardwalk. The riders had stopped now, forming a loose semicircle around the sheriff. Carter, the bearded one, swayed slightly in his saddle, clearly still drunk from the previous night. "Well, if it ain't the law," he slurred. "We're just having some fun, Mills." "Fun's over," Mills replied steadily. "Time for you boys to ride out." "Or what, you gonna arrest all 3 of us?" The second rider patted his gun meaningfully. Owen moved to stand beside the sheriff, his own hand resting on his holster.
"The man said ride out."
Carter's bloodshot eyes narrowed as he focused on Owen. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone who'd like to get home without blood on his boots," Owen replied evenly, "but that's up to you."
A tense silence fell.
Owen could feel every heartbeat, every breath. He'd been in situations like this before, moments when violence hung in the air like lightning before a storm. Sometimes it struck, sometimes it passed. Today, luck was with them. Carter spat to the side, then holstered his pistol with exaggerated care. "Ain't worth the trouble," he decided. "We're heading back to the ranch anyway." He fixed Owen with a glare.
"But I'll remember your face, mister."
"Do that," Owen said coldly. The riders turned their horses, but as they did, Carter's mount sidled close to the boardwalk where Owen had left his wagon. With deliberate malice, the man kicked over a crate of supplies, sending glass jars smashing to the ground. "Oops," he sneered, then spurred his horse forward, his companions following with raucous laughter. Owen stood motionless, watching them go, Only when they disappeared from view did he allow his shoulders to relax slightly. "Appreciate the backup," Mills said, holstering his weapon. "Those boys have been getting bolder lately." Owen nodded, already moving toward his wagon to assess the damage. At least 3 jars of preserved fruit were shattered, their contents seeping into the dust. Not a devastating loss, but Tucker's wife had specifically requested those preserves. "Mr. Sullivan," Delilah's voice came from behind him. She'd emerged from the mercantile, ignoring his instruction to stay inside. That was very brave. "That was stupid," he corrected, kneeling to clean up the broken glass. "Getting involved in other people's trouble." To his surprise, she knelt beside him, gathering glass fragments in her gloved hands. "Yet you did it anyway." "Miss Lambert, please don't." "I can help," she insisted. "4 hands work faster than 2. Owen wanted to argue but found he lacked the energy. They worked in silence for a few minutes, clearing the worst of the mess. "Mr. Johnson says he can replace the preserves," she said eventually. "He's preparing them now." Owen looked up sharply. "You arranged that?" A slight flush colored her cheeks. "I merely suggested it might be appropriate, considering you helped prevent further destruction to his storefront." The gesture unsettled Owen. He wasn't accustomed to people doing things for him without expectation. That wasn't necessary. "Perhaps not," she agreed, rising gracefully despite her kneeling position. "But it was right." Before Owen could respond, Johnson emerged from the store with a small crate. "Here you are, Sullivan. Best preserves I had in stock, no charge." Owen started to protest, but the shopkeeper waved him off. "Considerate payment for standing with Mills. Those cowboys would have shot up half the street otherwise." Reluctantly, Owen accepted the crate, securing it in his wagon. The delay meant he'd be riding later than planned, possibly into dusk before reaching the ranch. "You should go," Delilah said softly, as if reading his thoughts, "before something else delays you." Owen nodded, climbing onto the wagon seat. "Good day, Miss Lambert." "Mr. Sullivan." She stepped back, but her eyes held his for a moment longer than necessary. "I hope our paths cross again, despite the unlikelihood." Something in her words, a gentle challenge, perhaps, stayed with him as he guided the team down the street and out of town. The encounter left him with an unfamiliar feeling, one he couldn't immediately identify. It wasn't until he was miles from Willow Creek, the road stretching emptily before him, that he recognized it: curiosity. For the first time in years, he found himself wondering about another person's story. The realization was unwelcome. Curiosity led to connection, and connection inevitably led to loss. Better to focus on the work ahead, the cattle waiting at Box T, the familiar rhythm of ranch life where emotions were unnecessary complications. Yet as the wagon rolled through the afternoon heat, Owen found himself repeatedly circling back to the memory of hazel eyes that seemed to see past his carefully constructed walls, and the strange feeling that something significant had shifted in his carefully ordered world. 3 weeks passed before Owen returned to Willow Creek. He might have stayed away longer, but Tucker needed someone to deliver a telegram about cattle prices, and the task fell to him. The day was warm, late spring giving way to early summer, and the town seemed peaceful as he rode down the main street. He told himself he wasn't looking for her, but his eyes betrayed him, scanning boardwalks and storefronts. The schoolhouse stood at the far end of town, and as he passed the sheriff's office, he caught himself wondering if school was in session. The telegraph office was his first stop. After sending Tucker's message, he crossed to the mercantile for a few personal supplies. Johnson greeted him with the same enthusiastic familiarity. "Sullivan, good to see you. How'd those preserves work out?"
"Mrs."
Tucker was pleased, Owen acknowledged. "Appreciate it." Johnson beamed, glad to hear it. "Say you just missed Miss Lambert. She was in buying paper and books for the schoolchildren." Owen kept his expression neutral despite the unexpected leap in his chest. "Is that so?" "Remarkable woman," Johnson continued, seemingly oblivious to Owen's discomfort. "She started an evening class for adults who want to learn their letters. Got 3 ranch hands and old Mrs. Wilkins attending regular." Owen selected a pouch of tobacco, deliberately casual. "Sounds like she's settling in." "Oh, indeed, though there was some trouble last week." Johnson leaned in, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Carter and his friends rode through during recess, frightening the children. Miss Lambert stood right up to them, told them they were setting a poor example, and invited them to join her adult literacy class." Despite himself, Owen felt a smile tug at his lips. I imagine that went over well. About as well as you'd expect, but Sheriff Mills happened by and they rode off. Mills has been keeping a closer eye on the school since then. The information stirred something protective in Owen, an emotion he quickly tamped down. She should be more careful. Men like Carter don't take kindly to being lectured, especially by a woman. That's what the sheriff told her, but she just smiled and said education was worth the risk. Johnson shook his head admiringly. Brave as they come, that one. Owen paid for his purchases, his mind turning over this new information. The schoolteacher clearly had more courage than sense, a dangerous combination in these parts. As he stepped out of the mercantile, the afternoon sun momentarily blinded him. When his vision cleared, he found himself looking directly at Delilah Lambert, who was crossing the street toward him, a basket over her arm. Mr. Sullivan, she called, quickening her pace. What a pleasant surprise. Owen touched the brim of his hat, suddenly conscious of the trailed dust on his clothes and the stubble on his jaw. Miss Lambert, are you in town long? She reached the boardwalk, setting her basket down. She wore a simple green dress today, practical for the warm weather but still neatly tailored. Her hair was pinned up, though a few strands had escaped to frame her face. Just the day, he replied, ranch business. She nodded, seeming genuinely interested. And how is life at Box T? Busy. Spring calving's done, but there's always work. I imagine so, she smiled, the expression lighting her face. I've been learning about ranching from some of my students. Tommy Barnes draws the most detailed pictures of cattle I've ever seen. Barnes' boy, Owen knew the family, solid ranchers with land adjacent to Box T. Yes, he's quite talented, though according to him, the most impressive person in the territory is Mr. Sullivan, who can rope a steer from 50 paces. Owen felt his face warm. Tommy exaggerates. Perhaps, but children are often excellent judges of character. She tilted her head, studying him. I was just heading to the schoolhouse to prepare for tomorrow. Would you care to see it? Since you've become something of a legend to my students, it seems only fair they should know you've visited their classroom. Every instinct told Owen to refuse, to maintain the distance that had kept him safe for so long. Yet he found himself nodding for a few minutes. The pleasure in her expression was immediate and genuine. Wonderful, it's just down the street. As they walked, Owen found himself surprisingly comfortable in her presence. Delilah had a way of allowing silence that didn't demand to be filled, yet when she spoke, her observations were thoughtful. The children have been collecting artifacts for a local history project, she explained as they neared the small, white-painted building. They're quite proud of their display. What kind of artifacts? Owen asked, finding himself genuinely curious. Arrow points, old coins, a piece of a wagon wheel. Tommy brought in a spur he found in a creek bed. Her eyes sparkled with enthusiasm. I'm hoping to compile their findings into a small book by year's end. The schoolhouse was simple but well-maintained, with a bell tower and freshly painted steps. Inside, the single room held rows of desks facing a larger teacher's desk and blackboard. Windows allowed the afternoon light to stream in, illuminating the children's artwork pinned to the walls. It's not much compared to Eastern schools, Delilah said, watching his reaction, but we make do. Owen surveyed the room, noting the care that had gone into the space. Wildflowers in glass jars adorned the windowsills, and bookshelves lined one wall, surprisingly well-stocked for a frontier school. It's more than many frontier children get, he said honestly. Most learn to rope before they learn to read. Why not both? She set her basket on her desk. Skills of hand and mind complement each other, don't you think? The question was genuine, not rhetorical, and Owen found himself considering it seriously. I suppose they do, though out here, practical skills keep you alive. While reading and mathematics might help one thrive beyond mere survival, she suggested. At least, that's my hope for these children. Owen moved to examine the artifacts displayed near the back wall. It was impressively arranged, each item labeled in careful script. You've done well with this, he acknowledged. The children must be proud. They are. She moved to stand beside him, close enough that he could detect the faint scent of lavender. Though I confess I know little about some of these items. That spur, for instance, I can't tell how old it might be. Owen picked up the rusted item, turning it over in his hand. Mexican style, probably 30 years old at least. See the large rowel, American spurs tend to be smaller. Her eyes lit with interest, exactly the kind of knowledge I lack. Would you consider A shadow falling across the doorway interrupted her. Owen turned to find Carter and another man from Ramsay's crew standing in the entrance, their expressions anything but friendly. Well, well, Carter drawled, his eyes fixed on Delilah. The schoolmarm's got company. Owen instinctively moved to place himself between Delilah and the newcomers, his hand drifting toward his holster. School's closed, he said flatly. Whatever business you have can wait. Carter's gaze shifted to Owen, recognition dawning. I remember you, the hero from town, his lip curled in a sneer. Didn't know you were sweet on the teacher.
Mister.
Carter, Delilah said, stepping forward despite Owen's protective stance. If you're interested in the adult literacy class, it meets Tuesday evenings at 7. You'd be most welcome. The mockery in her tone was so subtle that for a moment, Carter seemed uncertain whether he was being insulted. His companion, a wiry man with a pockmarked face, snickered. She's calling you stupid, Carter. Carter's face darkened. I ain't here for reading lessons, just making sure the schoolmarm remembers what I said about keeping her nose out of Ramsay business.
Owen tensed. What business would that be?
None of yours, Carter spat. But Miss High and Mighty here took it upon herself to visit the Ortiz family after Ramsay bought their water rights.
Filling their heads with legal nonsense.
Delilah's chin lifted slightly. I merely informed Mr. Ortiz that contracts signed under duress may not be legally binding, particularly when the signatory doesn't read English.
A fact, not nonsense.
Owen inwardly groaned. Interfering in water rights disputes was dangerous even for men with guns, let alone Eastern schoolteachers with more courage than sense. You're playing with fire, Miss Lambert, Carter warned, taking a step forward. Ramsay don't like interference. Owen moved deliberately, his hand now resting openly on his holster.
And I don't like threats against ladies. Time for you to leave.
The standoff stretched for several tense seconds before Carter's companion tugged at his arm. Come on, Carter.
Sheriff's likely making his rounds.
With visible reluctance, Carter backed toward the door. This ain't finished, he said, his gaze shifting between them. Neither of you. Only when the sound of their horses faded did Owen turn to Delilah, anger and concern battling within him.
What were you thinking, getting involved with the Ortiz dispute?
To his surprise, she seemed unfazed by the confrontation. I was thinking that an immigrant family with 5 children was about to lose their livelihood through deception. Mr. Ortiz came to me for help reading a document. Once I understood what it was, I could hardly pretend ignorance.
Water rights are serious business out here, Owen said sharply. Men kill over less.
So I should have allowed an injustice because addressing it might be dangerous, her eyes flashed. Is that the Western code I've heard so much about?
The challenge in her voice struck a nerve.
Owen removed his hat, running a hand through his hair in frustration. It's not that simple. It rarely is, she agreed, her tone softening. But I can't teach these children about moral courage if I'm unwilling to demonstrate it myself.
Owen studied her, truly seeing the steel beneath her refined exterior.
Ramsay won't let this go. He's been trying to control the watershed for years. Then perhaps it's time someone stood against him. She held his gaze steadily. I don't expect to fight this battle alone, Mr. Sullivan.
But I won't pretend I don't see the injustice.
Something shifted in Owen's chest, admiration mingled with concern, and something deeper he wasn't ready to name. This woman, barely in the territory 6 weeks, had chosen a fight that men who'd lived here for years had avoided.
The Ortiz family, he said finally, how bad is their situation?
Relief softened her features. Desperate, the contract Ramsay tricked Mr. Ortiz into signing grants access to the spring that feeds their homestead. Without it, their crops will fail within weeks. Owen nodded slowly, an idea forming. Tucker might help. The box T depends on free water access too, if Ramsay's making moves like this. Then others might be at risk as well, Delilah finished, understanding immediately. I'll talk to Tucker when I get back, Owen promised, surprised by his own willingness to involve himself. But you need to be careful. Men like Carter don't differentiate between men and women when they feel threatened.
I appreciate your concern, she said, her expression warming. And your willingness to help.
The gratitude in her eyes made Owen uncomfortable, unaccustomed as he was to being viewed as anything but the solitary, taciturn cowhand he'd cultivated for years. He replaced his hat, eager to retreat to safer emotional ground. I should go, long ride back. Delilah nodded, though disappointment flickered briefly across her face. Of course, thank you for visiting the schoolhouse. And for your intervention with Mr. Carter. At the doorway, Owen paused. Against his better judgment, he found himself asking, will you be all right after what happened? Her smile was genuine. I've faced worse than angry cowboys, Mr. Sullivan. Something in her tone suggested a story there, but Owen knew better than to pry. Everyone in these parts carried histories they preferred to keep buried. He tipped his hat. Good day, Miss Lambert. Until next time, Mr. Sullivan. As he rode out of town, Owen found his thoughts in turmoil. The schoolteacher had managed to entangle him in precisely the kind of situation he'd spent years avoiding: other people's problems, community disputes, matters that required emotional investment. Yet he couldn't bring himself to regret it. The realization was unsettling. Something about Delilah Lambert had breached defenses he'd thought impenetrable, awakening parts of himself he'd deliberately buried after the war. The question now was what to do about it: continue down this dangerous path of connection, or retreat to the solitary existence that had sustained him for so long. As Willow Creek disappeared behind him, Owen knew the choice had already been made. He would speak to Tucker about the Ortiz situation, and in doing so, take the first step back toward a world where other people's welfare mattered to him. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. True to his word, Owen approached Thomas Tucker the following morning. The ranch owner was a fair man with a shrewd business sense, and he listened carefully to Owen's report on the Ramsay situation. Can't say I'm surprised, Tucker said, leaning back in his chair. Ramsay's been buying up small homesteads for years, but targeting the Ortiz Spring is bold, even for him. Miss Lambert thinks the contract might not hold up legally, given how it was obtained, Owen explained, feeling strangely like the schoolteacher's representative. Tucker's eyebrows rose. The new schoolmarm's involved in this, interesting. His weathered face creased in thought. The problem is, nearest circuit judge won't be through for another month, and by then the Ortiz crops will be dust. So Ramsay wins by default, Owen concluded grimly. Not necessarily, Tucker stood, moving to examine a map of the territory pinned to his office wall. Box T borders Ortiz land to the south. We've got water to spare from the West Creek. He traced a line with his finger. Could run a diversion through our property to their fields. Owen considered this. Ramsay would see it as direct opposition. Let him, Tucker's expression hardened. Man needs to learn he can't just swallow up every small holding that catches his eye. Besides, if he's going after water rights, Box T could be next. The solution was practical and immediate, exactly what the situation required. Owen felt a weight lift from his shoulders. I could supervise the diversion work, he offered. I know that terrain. Tucker studied him with newfound interest. You seem invested in this, Sullivan. Don't think I've ever seen you volunteer for anything that wasn't strictly ranch business. Owen shifted uncomfortably. Just seems like the right thing to do. A knowing smile crossed Tucker's face. Wouldn't have anything to do with a certain schoolteacher, would it? The Ortiz family has 5 children, Owen said stiffly, avoiding the implication. They shouldn't suffer for Ramsay's greed. Tucker laughed, clapping Owen on the shoulder. Relax, boy. I'm just giving you a hard time. Take Hernandez and Rodriguez tomorrow, start the diversion work, and maybe ride into town after. Let Miss Lambert know the Box T stands with her on this. The suggestion sent a complicated mix of anticipation and anxiety through Owen. Yes, sir. As he left Tucker's office, Owen found himself contemplating the strange turn his life had taken. 6 weeks ago, he wouldn't have given a second thought to a water rights dispute between ranchers, let alone volunteered to help resolve it. Now here he was, not only involved but actually looking forward to sharing the news with Delilah. The realization should have frightened him more than it did. The diversion work took 3 days of hard labor. Owen, along with Hernandez and Rodriguez, engineered a system that would channel enough water from Box T's Western Creek to sustain the Ortiz fields without significantly impacting Tucker's operations. Mr. Ortiz worked alongside them, his gratitude evident in every interaction despite the language barrier. By the afternoon of the 3rd day, water was flowing toward the parched Ortiz fields. The family's celebration was subdued but heartfelt, with Mrs. Ortiz insisting the Box T men stay for a meal of tortillas and beans. As they ate in the shade of the Ortiz's modest porch, Owen found himself drawn into conversation with the family's oldest son, Miguel, a serious boy of about 12 who spoke excellent English. Miss Lambert says you fought in the war, Miguel said, his dark eyes curious. Were you afraid? The question caught Owen off guard. He rarely spoke of his war experiences, even with other veterans. Yes, he admitted finally. Anyone who says they weren't is lying. Miguel nodded solemnly. Papa says fear is normal, but courage is choosing to act anyway. The simple wisdom struck Owen deeply. Your father's right. Miss Lambert says the same thing, Miguel continued. She says books and learning give us courage because they help us understand the world. Owen found himself smiling slightly. She's a wise woman. She said you would help us, the boy added matter-of-factly. When Mr. Ramsay took our water, she told Mama not to worry because good people would stand with us. The statement hit Owen with unexpected force. Delilah had expressed such confidence in him, in his character, before he'd given any indication he would help. The trust implicit in that belief was both flattering and unsettling. Well, he said awkwardly, Mr. Tucker's the one who arranged everything. Miguel shook his head with the certainty of youth, but Miss Lambert said you would bring the message to him. She was right. Later, as Owen and the other men prepared to ride back to Box T, Mr. Ortiz approached, his English halting but his meaning clear. My family we no forget, he said earnestly, gripping Owen's hand. You welcome here always. The moment affected Owen more than he cared to admit. Connection, belonging, these were things he deliberately denied himself for years. Yet here they were, being offered freely by people who barely knew him. On the ride back, Rodriguez nudged his horse alongside Owen's. You gonna tell the schoolteacher what we did? He asked with a knowing grin. Word is she's mighty pretty. Owen kept his expression neutral. Mr. Tucker will want her to know the situation's resolved. Hernandez laughed from his other side. Come on, Sullivan, everyone knows you rode to town twice in the last month. Before that, we couldn't drag you there with a lasso. The teasing was good-natured, but it made Owen acutely aware of how obvious his interest in Delilah must be to others. He'd never been particularly skilled at hiding his emotions, only at avoiding situations that might provoke them. She's concerned about the children, he said defensively, that's all. Sure, amigo, Hernandez replied, still grinning. And I ride into town every Saturday just to attend church. Owen allowed a small smile at that. Hernandez's Saturday visits to a certain widow were an open secret at the ranch. Fine. I'll ride in tomorrow, let her know about the Ortiz water. And maybe stay for Sunday dinner, Rodriguez suggested innocently. Don't push your luck, Owen retorted, but there was no heat in it. As they rode toward the setting sun, Owen found himself anticipating the next day's journey with something dangerously close to eagerness. The thought of seeing Delilah's face when he told her about the water diversion, of earning one of her rare, genuine smiles, it stirred feelings he'd thought long dead. For the first time in years, Owen Sullivan was riding toward something, not away. Sunday morning dawned clear and bright. Owen took more care than usual with his appearance, shaving carefully and putting on his least-worn shirt. He told himself it was simple respect for the Sabbath, but the knowing looks from the bunkhouse suggested his efforts weren't fooling anyone. Got a letter needs delivering in town, Hernandez said, straight-faced, holding out an envelope. Since you're heading that way. Owen took it with a withering look. Anything else? Shopping list, telegram. Rodriguez grinned. Just tell Miss Lambert we're all looking forward to meeting her at the Box T summer dance. There is no Box T summer dance, Owen pointed out. There could be, Hernandez suggested. Tucker's wife been talking about hosting one for years. Owen shook his head, mounting his freshly groomed horse. I'll be back by evening. Sure you will, came the chorus of disbelieving responses. The ride to Willow Creek passed quickly, Owen's thoughts occupied with what he would say to Delilah and how she might respond. It had been years since he'd courted a woman, if that's what he was doing, and the rules of such interactions felt foreign after so long. As he approached town, church bells rang out across the valley. The Sunday service would be starting soon. Owen hadn't attended church regularly since before the war, but today he found himself drawn toward the white steeple that rose above the town's other buildings. He stabled his horse at the livery, then walked toward the church, removing his hat as he approached. The congregation was just filing in, families dressed in their Sunday best. Owen hesitated at the steps, suddenly aware of his status as an outsider, but before he could retreat, a familiar voice called his name. Mr. Sullivan, what a pleasant surprise. Delilah stood near the church entrance. wearing a pale blue dress that complemented her eyes and made Owen momentarily forget what he'd planned to say. She carried a small prayer book, and her hair was arranged more elaborately than he'd seen before, with a matching blue ribbon woven through the braids. "Miss Lambert," he managed, touching the brim of his hat before remembering he'd already removed it. "Good morning." Her smile was warm. "Are you joining us for the service?" Owen glanced toward the church doors, where other townsfolk were entering. Some were watching their interaction with undisguised curiosity. "I hadn't planned to, but—" "Please do," she said, her expression genuinely hopeful. Reverend Michaels gives a mercifully brief sermon, and the company is pleasant. Before he could form a polite refusal, she added, "You could tell me about the Ortiz situation afterward." Miguel's brother Carlos mentioned seeing Box T men working near their spring. The invitation was so naturally delivered that Owen found himself nodding. "All right, but I should warn you, it's been some time since I attended services." Her smile widened. "God welcomes prodigals most warmly, or so I'm told." The service was indeed brief, and despite his initial discomfort, Owen found a certain peace in the familiar rituals and hymns of his youth. Delilah sat beside him, her clear voice joining the congregation's singing. Once or twice, their eyes met during particularly meaningful passages of Scripture, creating a connection that felt almost intimate. Afterward, as the congregation dispersed, several townsfolk approached to greet Delilah, their curious glances at Owen making it clear his presence beside the schoolteacher was noteworthy. She introduced him simply as Mr. Sullivan from the Box T Ranch, offering no explanation for his attendance or their acquaintance. When they finally extricated themselves from the social obligations, Delilah turned to him with an apologetic smile. "Would you care to walk? I find the area behind the schoolhouse quite pleasant on Sunday afternoons." Owen agreed, relieved to escape the scrutiny of the townspeople. As they walked, he told her about the water diversion project and Tucker's support for the Ortiz family. "That's wonderful news," she exclaimed, genuine delight lighting her features. "The children have been so worried. This will mean everything to them." "Tucker's concerned about Ramsay's water grabbing too," Owen explained. "It's not just charity, it's protecting Box T interests as well." "Does that matter?" she asked perceptively. "Whether the help comes from pure altruism or enlightened self-interest, the result is the same. The Ortiz family can keep their home and livelihood." Owen considered this. "I suppose you're right, though Tucker would have helped regardless. I think he's a fair man." They reached a small clearing behind the schoolhouse, where a few benches had been placed beneath shade trees. Delilah sat, arranging her skirts, and after a moment's hesitation, Owen joined her. "I should thank you," she said, turning to face him. "Miguel told me you were the one who brought their situation to Mr. Tucker's attention." Owen felt his face warm at the gratitude in her eyes. It was nothing, just passing along information. "It was far more than that," she insisted gently. "You chose to get involved when you could have easily minded your own business. That speaks to your character, Mr. Sullivan." The praise made him uncomfortable, unaccustomed as he was to such direct appreciation. "Most would say I don't have much character to speak of," he deflected. "Most don't know you very well then." Her gaze was steady, penetrating in a way that made him feel both seen and exposed. "Though I confess I'm still learning myself." There was a question in her statement, an invitation to reveal more of himself that Owen found simultaneously terrifying and tempting. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. "I fought for the Union," he said finally, the admission surprising even himself. "Lost 2 brothers and came back, different. Not the sort of difference people understand easily." Delilah's expression softened with compassion, but without the pity he'd come to dread. "War changes people, how could it not?" "Some came back and built lives," Owen continued, the words coming easier now. "Found purpose, I just drifted, kept to myself, seemed safer that way." "Safer for whom?" The simple question struck at the heart of his carefully constructed isolation. "For everyone," he said after a pause. "Getting close to people, it just gives you more to lose." Delilah considered this, her face thoughtful. "That's certainly true," she acknowledged, "but it also gives you more to live for." The statement hung between them, challenging the belief system Owen had built over years of deliberate disconnection. Before he could respond, a shout from the direction of town drew their attention. "Miss Lambert," a young boy was running toward them, his face flushed with exertion. "Miss Lambert, come quick."
There's trouble at the Ortiz place. Owen was on his feet immediately. What kind of trouble, boy? Ramsay men, the child gasped, pointing back toward town. Sheriff's gathering men to ride out. They're destroying the water pipes. Delilah rose swiftly, gathering her skirts. Is anyone hurt? Don't know, ma'am. Sheriff just said to fetch any able men. Owen was already moving. Get to safety, Miss Lambert. I'll join the sheriff. I'm coming with you, she countered, falling into step beside him. Absolutely not, Owen said firmly. This could get dangerous. The Ortiz children might need help, she insisted. I speak Spanish and they trust me. There was no time to argue. They hurried toward the center of town, where Sheriff Mills was organizing a group of men outside his office. Mills looked grim as they approached. Sullivan, good. We could use another gun. His eyes narrowed when he saw Delilah. Miss Lambert, this isn't women's business. The welfare of my students is precisely my business, Sheriff, she replied calmly. I'll stay back from any confrontation, but someone should attend to the family. Mills hesitated, then nodded curtly. Stay with Dr. Fenton then, he's coming along in case there are injuries. Within minutes, a party of 12 men plus Delilah and the doctor were riding hard toward the Ortiz homestead. Owen kept close to Delilah, acutely aware of the danger they might be riding into. Ramsay's men were known for their volatility, and property disputes in the territory often turned violent. As they crested a rise overlooking the Ortiz property, Owen's worst fears were confirmed. Several men on horseback were systematically tearing up the irrigation channels that had been so carefully constructed. The wooden piping lay in splintered pieces across the field, and black smoke rose from what appeared to be a burning haystack. Stay with the doctor, Owen instructed Delilah as the sheriff organized the men into a defensive line. Don't approach until we've secured the area. For once she didn't argue, nodding her agreement as she reined her horse beside Dr. Fenton's wagon. Sheriff Mills led the group down the slope, calling out for Ramsay's men to stand down. Owen, riding slightly behind, scanned the area for the Ortiz family, spotting them huddled near their cabin. Miguel stood protectively in front of his younger siblings, while Mr. Ortiz appeared to be bleeding from a head wound. The confrontation was brief but tense. Outnumbered and now facing armed townsfolk rather than a single immigrant family, Ramsay's men quickly lost their appetite for destruction. Carter, recognizing Owen among the sheriff's party, directed a particularly venomous glare in his direction before riding off with the others. This ain't over, he shouted as they departed. Ramsay won't stand for this interference. Once the threat had passed, Delilah hurried forward with the doctor to attend to the family. Owen dismounted near Miguel, who looked both frightened and defiant. Are you hurt? Owen asked, kneeling to the boy's level. Miguel shook his head. They hit Papa when he tried to stop them. I wanted to fight but had to protect the little ones. You did the right thing, Owen assured him, surprised by the fierce protectiveness he felt toward the child. Your father would be proud. Across the yard, Delilah was speaking rapidly in Spanish to Mrs. Ortiz, while the doctor examined Mr. Ortiz's wound. The damage to the irrigation system was extensive but not irreparable. The burning haystack fortunately had been isolated and hadn't spread to other structures. Sheriff Mills approached, his expression grim. This is getting out of hand. I'll ride to the county seat tomorrow, see about getting legal intervention. That could take weeks, Owen pointed out. The Ortiz crops won't last that long without water. I know it, Mills sighed heavily. But without the judge's authority, my hands are tied. I can keep the peace, but I can't settle property disputes. Owen glanced toward the damaged irrigation system, calculating. We can rebuild it. I'll talk to Tucker about sending more men. Ramsay's just going to tear it down again, Mills warned. Then we'll post guards, Owen replied, surprising himself with his determination. The box T has enough hands to spare a few for night watches. Mills studied him curiously. You're taking this mighty personal, Sullivan. Before Owen could respond, Delilah joined them, her face flushed with anger. Mr. Ortiz says Carter threatened the children directly, said next time they might not be so lucky. The information sent a cold fury through Owen. Threatening children crossed a line even the roughest elements in the territory respected. That true, Miguel? He asked the boy who had remained close to his side. Miguel nodded solemnly. The bearded man said we should pack up and leave before worse happens. Mills cursed under his breath. That's criminal intimidation. I can arrest Carter for that at least.
If you can find him, Owen said grimly. Ramsay's ranch is 20 miles north with plenty of hiding places. As the men discussed options, Delilah knelt beside Miguel. You and your family will stay with Mrs. Patterson tonight, she said gently. It's not safe here until we resolve this situation. The boy looked alarmed, but our crops will be tended, Owen finished for him. I'll make sure of it. The gratitude in Delilah's eyes as she looked up at him was almost unbearable in its intensity. Thank you, she said simply. By evening, arrangements had been made. The Ortiz family would stay in town under the sheriff's protection, while Owen and several Box T hands would camp at the property to guard against further sabotage. Tucker, informed of the situation via messenger, had responded with immediate support and additional men. As the Ortiz family prepared to leave with Dr. Fenton and several townspeople, Delilah approached Owen, who was organizing the remaining men to begin repairs on the irrigation system. You've done more than anyone could have expected, she said softly. These people will never forget it. Owen continued working as he spoke, uncomfortable with the praise, just doing what needs doing. Is that all? She moved closer, lowering her voice so others couldn't hear. Or is it possible that the man who believes in keeping his distance has found something worth fighting for? The question hit closer to home than she could know. Owen paused, meeting her gaze directly. Maybe I have. Her smile in response was like sunrise after a long night. Good, because I think that man has been hiding too long. Before Owen could reply, Sheriff Mills called for Delilah to join the departing group. With a final, meaningful look, she turned away, leaving Owen to contemplate the strange, unfamiliar feeling expanding in his chest, something dangerously close to hope. The next week passed in a blur of activity. Owen split his time between regular ranch duties and overseeing the reconstruction of the Ortiz irrigation system. The work was difficult but satisfying, especially as other ranchers in the area, hearing of Ramsay's tactics, began sending men and supplies to help. What had started as one family's crisis had quickly evolved into a community stand against bullying and water theft. Even Tucker, initially motivated by self-interest, had become personally invested in seeing the Ortiz family restored to their property. True to Mill's prediction, Ramsay's men made another attempt to sabotage the irrigation 3 nights after the initial attack. This time, however, they found the property guarded by 6 armed cowboys who persuaded them to reconsider without a shot being fired. Through it all, Owen found himself drawn repeatedly to town, ostensibly to check on the Ortiz family, but increasingly to seek out Delilah's company. Their conversations, once stilted and formal, had evolved into something deeper. He found himself sharing thoughts and memories he'd kept buried for years, while she spoke of her own journey, leaving a comfortable Eastern life to teach on the frontier after losing both parents to influenza. People thought I was running away, she confided one evening as they walked along the creek that ran behind the schoolhouse. Perhaps I was, in part, but I also felt called to something more meaningful than Boston society parties. Do you regret it? Owen asked, genuinely curious. She considered this, her face thoughtful in the fading light. There are comforts I miss: hot baths, libraries, theater. A smile touched her lips. But no, I don't regret coming here. Not for a moment. Even with situations like the Ortiz dispute. Especially because of situations like that. Her eyes met his, sincere and direct. What use is education if not to fight injustice? What purpose does knowledge serve if not to help others? Her certainty both impressed and challenged Owen. In the years since the war, he deliberately avoided causes, commitments, anything that might require him to care too deeply. Yet here was this woman, walking willingly into conflicts that didn't directly concern her, driven by principles that seemed as natural to her as breathing. You make it sound simple, he said finally. It isn't, she acknowledged. But some things are worth the complexity they bring to our lives. The statement hung between them, loaded with meaning that extended far beyond the Ortiz situation. Owen found himself wondering if Delilah counted him among those worth the complexity, and more surprisingly, if she had become such for him. On the 10th day after the attack, Sheriff Mills returned from the county seat with welcome news. The circuit judge had issued an injunction against Ramsay, prohibiting any further interference with the Ortiz water access until a proper hearing could be held. That evening, a small celebration was held at the schoolhouse to mark the Ortiz family's return to their homestead. The entire community seemed to attend, bringing food and music to welcome the family home. Owen, uncomfortable with crowds but unwilling to miss seeing Delilah, arrived late and lingered near the door. Mr. Sullivan, Miguel spotted him immediately, rushing over with excitement. Papa says the water is flowing better than before. He says you are a master builder. Owen smiled despite himself, ruffling the boy's hair. Your father did most of the work, I just supervised. Still, Miguel's expression grew serious. We will not forget. The simple declaration touched Owen more than elaborate thanks could have. That's what neighbors do, Miguel. Help each other. Is that what they taught you in the war? The boy asked innocently. Owen considered this, searching for an honest answer that wouldn't burden a child. No, he said finally. That's what I learned after from people like your family. And Miss Lambert? Miguel nodded sagely. She says the same about you, that you teach by example. Before Owen could process this revelation, Delilah appeared beside them, looking radiant in a simple burgundy dress. Miguel, your mother is looking for you. I believe there's cake being served. The boy needed no further encouragement, darting away toward the refreshment table. You came, Delilah said, turning to Owen with evident pleasure. I wasn't sure you would. Neither was I, he admitted, not much for gatherings. Yet here you are, her smile was knowing. Perhaps for the cake. Perhaps for the company, he countered, surprising himself with the directness. A becoming blush colored her cheeks. In that case, would you care to walk outside? It's rather warm in here. The night air was cool and crisp, stars scattered like diamond dust across the velvet sky. They walked in companionable silence, eventually finding a bench at the edge of the schoolyard. The sounds of the celebration drifted out to them, laughter, music, the normal cadence of community that Owen had denied himself for so long. The Ortiz case has been good for Willow Creek, Delilah observed. People working together, finding common cause, it's how communities should function. Owen nodded, understanding her meaning. The crisis had revealed the best in many townspeople who might otherwise have remained distant from each other. Shared adversity builds strong bonds. As does shared victory, she added, though I suspect Ramsay isn't finished causing trouble. Probably not, Owen agreed, but he'll think twice before targeting smaller ranchers now. Word is, 3 other property owners have formed an association to protect water rights. Delilah's face lit with interest. Is the box tea joining them? Tucker's considering it. Owen hesitated, then added, he's asked me to represent the ranch at the meetings. That's wonderful, her genuine enthusiasm warmed him. You'd be perfect for that role. Owen shifted uncomfortably. I've spent years avoiding getting involved in anything, not sure I'm the right choice. Which is precisely why you are, she countered, her eyes earnest in the moonlight. You understand the value of what's at stake, not just water rights but the right of people to live without fear, to belong to something larger than themselves. The insight was so accurate it momentarily robbed Owen of response. How did this woman see so clearly what he himself was only beginning to recognize? Maybe, he conceded finally. Though I'm still figuring out what belonging means after all this time. Delilah's expression softened. It means different things to different people. For some it's a place, for others a purpose. She paused, her voice quieter. For many it's a person. The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibility. Owen found himself leaning slightly toward her, drawn by a force as natural and inevitable as gravity. Delilah, he began, her given name feeling right on his lips for the first time. I'm not the man I was before the war, may never be again, but being around you. It makes me want to try. The confession cost him dearly, exposing vulnerabilities he'd protected for years. But as her hand found his in the darkness, fingers intertwining with gentle certainty, he knew the risk had been worth taking. We are all changed by our experiences, Owen, she replied, his name a caress in her voice. The question is not whether we can return to who we were, but whether we can become who we're meant to be. In that moment beneath the vast western sky, Owen Sullivan felt something within him shift permanently. The walls he'd built so carefully began to crumble, not in the catastrophic collapse he'd feared for so long, but in a gentle surrender to possibility. As if reading his thoughts, Delilah moved closer, her presence a comfort rather than a threat. Whatever you decide about Tucker's offer, know that you've already changed this community for the better. You've reminded people what courage looks like. Owen shook his head, humbled by her assessment. I just did what needed doing. Exactly, her smile was luminous in the moonlight, and in doing so you found your way back to the man you truly are. The celebration continued inside, but for Owen and Delilah, the real transformation was happening in the quiet space between them, where two souls long accustomed to standing alone were discovering the strength that comes from standing together. Summer turned to autumn, bringing change to both the landscape and Owen Sullivan's life. The Water Rights Association had grown to include most of the smaller ranchers in the county, with Owen serving as its spokesman, a role that still felt strange but increasingly natural as the weeks passed. Ramsay, facing unified opposition and legal challenges, had been forced to abandon his more aggressive tactics. The circuit judge had ruled definitively in the Ortiz family's favor, securing their water access permanently. The victory had cemented Owen's reputation as a man who stood for justice, a far cry from the solitary, detached figure he'd been just months before. His relationship with Delilah had deepened through the summer, evolving from cautious friendship to something neither could deny was love. They spent evenings discussing books she recommended, weekends exploring the hills surrounding Willow Creek, and Sundays attending church together, a practice Owen had resumed with surprising comfort. The town had accepted their courtship with the matter-of-fact pragmatism of frontier communities. A handsome cowboy and a beautiful schoolteacher finding each other was considered natural, even inevitable. Only a few, like Sheriff Mills and Thomas Tucker, recognized the profound transformation that had occurred in Owen, how the closed, suspicious survivor had gradually opened himself to connection, purpose, and hope. On a crisp October afternoon, Owen rode into town earlier than usual for his weekly visit with Delilah. A small box burned a hole in his pocket, a simple silver ring he'd purchased on his last trip to the county seat. After weeks of consideration, he decided to ask Delilah to marry him, though anxiety about her response still gnawed at him. The schoolhouse was quiet when he arrived, the children having been dismissed an hour earlier. He found Delilah at her desk, grading arithmetic papers with the focused attention she brought to all her tasks. She looked up as he entered, her face brightening with pleasure. "Owen. I wasn't expecting you until later." He removed his hat, suddenly nervous. "Finished early at the ranch, thought I'd surprise you." She set aside her work, rising to greet him with the warm smile that never failed to quicken his heart. "A lovely surprise indeed." Before he could lose his courage, Owen took her hands in his. "I was hoping we might walk by the creek. There's something I'd like to discuss." Curiosity flickered in her eyes, but she nodded, reaching for her shawl. "Of course, let me just gather my things." The afternoon was perfect, golden sunlight filtering through trees that had begun to turn crimson and amber, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine from the distant mountains. They walked along their usual path, Owen uncharacteristically quiet as he rehearsed the words he'd planned. "You seem preoccupied," Delilah observed gently as they reached a favorite spot where the creek widened into a small pool. "Is everything all right?" Owen took a deep breath, turning to face her fully. "More than all right, that's what I wanted to talk about." Her expression was expectant, patient as always. Owen took her hands again, finding strength in their warmth. "When I came to this territory after the war, I believed the only way to survive was to keep everyone at a distance," he began. "I convinced myself that caring for others was a weakness I couldn't afford. That loving someone meant giving life another weapon to use against me." Delilah's eyes softened with understanding, but she remained silent, allowing him to continue. "Then I met you," Owen said, his voice growing more certain. "And everything I thought I knew began to change. You showed me that true strength isn't found in isolation but in connection. In standing for something larger than yourself," he swallowed hard, "in loving someone even though it terrifies you." Her hands tightened on his, tears beginning to shimmer in her eyes. "I'm not the man I was when you first met me," Owen continued. "I'm someone better because of you, because you believed I could be even when I didn't." With hands that trembled slightly, he reached into his pocket and withdrew the small box. Delilah's breath caught as he opened it, revealing the silver ring with its modest diamond. "Delilah Lambert, I love you more than I ever thought possible." Owen's voice was steady now, certain in a way he'd rarely been in his life. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears spilled freely down her cheeks, but her smile was radiant. "Yes, Owen Sullivan, with all my heart, yes." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Owen felt the last of his old barriers dissolve completely. In their place was something he'd never expected to find again after the war, a future bright with promise, a heart full with love, and a life defined not by what he'd lost but by what he'd found. Their kiss sealed the promise, tender and sweet beneath the autumn sky. When they finally parted, Delilah looked up at him with eyes that reflected the journey they'd taken together. "You know," she said softly, "when I came west, I thought I was leaving everything behind. I never imagined I was actually traveling toward everything I needed." Owen brushed a strand of hair from her face, marveling at the twist of fate that had brought this remarkable woman into his life. "I spent years running from connections, only to discover they were my salvation all along." Hand in hand, they walked back toward town, toward a community that had become home, toward a future they would build together. The broken cowboy who had once believed love was a liability had found instead that it was his greatest strength, a truth that would sustain him through all the challenges and joys that lay ahead. 3 months later, on a clear January morning, Owen Sullivan stood at the front of Willow Creek's small church, watching as Delilah walked toward him on Sheriff Mill's arm. Her white dress, simple but elegant, seemed to glow in the winter sunlight streaming through the stained glass windows. Her face, partially obscured by a delicate veil, held the smile that had first begun to heal his wounded heart. The church was filled to capacity: box tea hands, townspeople, the Ortiz family, teachers from neighboring communities, even a few ranchers from the Water Association. Thomas Tucker stood beside Owen as his best man, beaming with paternal pride at the transformation of his once solitary ranch hand. As Delilah reached him, Owen felt a sense of certainty and peace that had been absent from his life for longer than he could remember. When she placed her hand in his, he knew with absolute clarity that the journey that had begun in pain and isolation had led him exactly where he needed to be. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Michaels began, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of two souls who have found in each other the healing and strength that God intends for us all." The words washed over Owen, profound in their simplicity and truth. He and Delilah had written their own vows, and when the time came to speak them, his voice rang clear and confident through the church. "Delilah, when I met you, I was a man who believed he was beyond saving. You taught me that no one is ever too broken to be made whole again. You showed me that real courage isn't facing danger alone, but opening your heart despite the risk of loss." He squeezed her hands gently. "I promise to stand beside you through whatever life brings us, to be your partner, your protector, and your friend, to love you with the wholeness you helped me find in myself. This is my solemn vow." Tears glistened in Delilah's eyes as she responded, her voice steady despite the emotion. "Owen, you came into my life when I was searching for purpose and belonging. In you I found not only those things, but a love I never expected. You showed me that strength can be quiet, that courage often looks like daily perseverance, and that the most profound transformations happen in ordinary moments." Her smile was radiant through her tears. "I promise to walk with you through joy and sorrow, to support your dreams as you've supported mine, and to remind you always of the good man you truly are. This I vow with all my heart." As they exchanged rings and were pronounced husband and wife, Owen felt the final pieces of his new life falling into place. The kiss they shared was a promise, a celebration, and a beginning all at once. The reception was held at the Box T Ranch, where Mrs. Tucker had indeed organized the dance that Hernandez had jokingly predicted months earlier. Lanterns hung from the rafters of the barn, which had been transformed with ribbons and flowers into a space of unexpected beauty. Musicians played as townspeople and ranchers alike filled their plates and raised glasses to the new couple. Miguel Ortiz, solemnly performing his duties as ring-bearer, approached Owen and Delilah as they greeted guests. "Papa says to tell you that our first crop this year will be dedicated to you both. A wedding gift." Owen knelt to the boy's level, touched by the gesture. "Tell your father we're honored and that you're all welcome at our home anytime." "Will you still teach us about ranching?" Miguel asked, his dark eyes serious. "Even though you're married now." "Especially because I'm married," Owen assured him. "Mrs. Sullivan thinks education is very important, you know." The boy grinned at Delilah, who had knelt beside Owen. "Will you still be our teacher?" The other children were worried. "Absolutely," Delilah confirmed. "Though I'll be writing from the Sullivan homestead instead of the boarding house." This seemed to satisfy Miguel, who nodded gravely before darting off to share the news with his siblings. As they rose, Thomas Tucker approached, champagne glasses in hand. "For the happy couple," he said, passing them each a glass. "Though I have to say, Sullivan, when I sent you to town for supplies last spring, I didn't expect you to bring back a wife." Owen laughed, a sound that had once been rare but now came easily. "Neither did I, sir, but it was the best journey I ever made." Tucker's expression grew more serious. "I've known you 3 years, son, and I've never seen you as whole as you are today.
Miss Lambert, forgive me, Mrs. Sullivan has worked a miracle. Not a miracle, Delilah corrected gently. Just love, the kind that believes in someone even when they've stopped believing in themselves. Tucker raised his glass to love then, and to new beginnings. As the evening progressed, Owen found himself constantly drawn back to Delilah's side, as if some invisible force connected them even when duties as host and hostess temporarily separated them. During their first dance as husband and wife, he held her close, still marveling at the journey that had brought them together. Happy? He asked softly as they moved across the floor, aware of smiling faces watching them. Completely, she answered, her eyes reflecting the lantern light, though I must confess something. What's that? Her smile turned slightly mischievous. Do you remember the day we met, when you escorted me to Mrs. Patterson's boarding house? Of course, it was a day etched permanently in his memory. I knew perfectly well how to get there, she admitted. I'd already visited the town twice before taking the teaching position. I just wanted an excuse to speak with the handsome, mysterious cowboy everyone talked about but no one seemed to know. Owen laughed, surprised and charmed by the confession. You planned that. Let's say I recognized an opportunity, she corrected, her eyes dancing. You look so reluctant, yet you couldn't quite bring yourself to refuse. I'm glad I didn't, Owen said, his voice growing serious again. That day changed everything for me, though I didn't know it then. Delilah's hand tightened on his shoulder, for me as well. As the dance ended, they found themselves near the barn doors. By mutual, unspoken agreement, they slipped outside into the crisp night air, seeking a moment of quiet amidst the celebration. The stars spread across the sky in countless points of light, the same stars that had witnessed their first real conversation months ago. Owen wrapped his arm around Delilah's waist, drawing her close against the winter chill. Our homestead will be ready next week, he said, referring to the small but sturdy house they'd been building on land Tucker had sold them at a generous price. It's not much, but it's ours, Delilah finished for him, and that makes it perfect. The simple truth of her words struck Owen deeply. For years after the war, he'd drifted without roots, believing himself unworthy or incapable of the connections others formed so naturally. Now, standing beside his wife under the vast western sky, he understood finally that his greatest wound had not been what he'd experienced during the conflict, but what he'd denied himself after, the healing power of love and community. I want you to know something, he said, turning to face Delilah fully. Before I met you, I thought broken meant worthless. You showed me that being broken is just part of being human, and that healing doesn't mean forgetting the past, it means building a future anyway. Delilah reached up to touch his face, her eyes reflecting the depth of her understanding. And you showed me that courage isn't fearlessness, but moving forward despite the fear. That loving someone is always a risk, but one worth taking. Their kiss beneath the stars was a promise and a celebration of the journey they'd taken and the life they would build together. When they returned to the barn, rejoining the friends and neighbors who had become family, Owen Sullivan walked with the certainty of a man who had found not just love, but home. The broken cowboy had indeed found his strength in love. Not through magical healing or forgetting the pain of his past, but through the daily choice to open his heart despite the risk. In Delilah's steadfast belief in him, Owen had rediscovered the man he was meant to be, not perfect, not unmarked by life's hardships, but whole in all the ways that mattered. As they danced again among friends, their future stretching before them like the boundless western horizon, Owen knew with unshakable certainty that some forms of brokenness don't diminish a person. They simply create spaces where love can enter and transform. And in that knowledge he was finally completely free.